There is pressure to make South Africa an energy experiment for the complete abandoning of coal as an energy source in favor of exclusive reliance on renewable energy. Ramaphosa has received $8.5 billion to surrender our energy capacity to this irrational experiment that will collapse our economy and result in the loss of thousands of jobs, particularly in Mpumalanga. This happens in the context of Europe nations increasing their use of coal to generate energy, revealing that it is nothing but environmental imperialism by nations who want to maximize the extraction of our coal by getting us to stop using it completely. Germany is expanding its coal mines to the extent of removing settlements so that they can easily access coal to generate electricity. In China, coal power plants are being expanded and built because the role of coal is still central to the production and industrial process. In the United States of America, there is a heavy pressure on Biden administration to expand its coal reserves and operation by coal miners themselves. Yet, as we sit here, the U.S. Secretary of Treasury is here in South Africa to entrench the agenda of making South Africa to abandon coal. Comrades, the EFF must lead workers and coal mining communities in rejecting the agenda to collapse our coal mining sector and the non-existence of so-called just transition. There is no plan to transition to renewable energy source in a way that will secure jobs and ensure energy security in South Africa. And to make matters worse, there is no consultation that has been done with South Africans on the planned closure of coal power stations. We must lead the revolt in these communities, but more importantly, the EFF must begin to develop a coherent and practical energy policy. Fighters, commissars, and comrades, the West has a tendency of creating an impression that one of the problems confronting the continent is that of authority. The notion that the absence of authority is what will result in freedom and prosperity, and that all attempts running communist and socialist states have failed primarily due to authoritarian character of the leadership of these revolutions or states. President Mugabe, President Gaddafi, President Sankara, President Castro, President Xi Jinping, President Putin are all accused of being authoritarian, as if the West is controlled by friendliness of students of democracy. But put differently, as if democracy itself lacks authority. Authority refers to the imposition of the will of one sector of society unto other. And in the instance of democracy, authority refers to the will of the majority prevailing over the few. In any instance, authority itself is ever present in order for any system to function. There must be a command from superior to subordinate. The demonized authority within the revolution, within a context where we wage a war against capitalism, is either ignorant or deliberate sowing of the seeds of confusion. What the liberal thinkers who try and discredit authority fail to understand in their hypocritical views on authority is that authority is consistent under any economic and political system, and that even capitalism itself thrives on authority. Capitalism survives on the fact that the state which currently operates to preserve capitalist interests operate with an authority of having monopoly on violence. Authority refers to the system, hierarchy, and the following of a system as a result of a power which is given legitimately by the people. As socialists who are in war with the most perverted global economic system known to mankind, the absence of authority in our revolution is a guarantee of failure. The West wants us to lack authority so that we can be chaotic and disorganized, and we must never allow our enemy to define us. We must always subject ourselves to the authority of the leadership, a leadership which draws its legitimacy from the masses and not subscribe to the reactionary or liberal definition of democracy, which will strip the revolution of its essence. As a Marxist, we seek the authority of the proletariat to surpass that of the bourgeoisie. Marxism is a school of thought wherein the working class destroys the authority of capitalism, which thrives on the ideals of private property, an economy designed for profiting an elite at the exclusion of the poor and the monopoly of wealth in the hands of the few. In simple terms, as Marxists, we believe in the authority of the people over the means of production and not authority of the bourgeoisie over the people and the means of production. We believe that the people must dictate the form and character and direction of the economy, not the elite few, controlling our political, social, and economic reality under the lie of neutral market forces. So no one, commissars and fighters, has any ideological basis to call the EFF authoritarian, because the very system of capitalism which we live under thrives on authority, and that authority is of the few. The aggression, therefore, that confronts us as socialists is not based on the ideological belief that we operate and strive for conditions where freedom are stripped from people. Rather, we are attacked and labeled because capitalism wants to have global hegemony, and that means being aggressive to any emerging economic and political alternative. That is the motivating factor behind the aggression of global capitalism that seeks to exist on its own, and as a result, it ironically seeks to exclusively have authority. Cuba has been subjected to over 60 years of sanctions and embargoes because they have shown the possibility of the success of socialism and the authority of the working class. China is being characterized as an emerging threat because they pose a threat to global imperialism through massive production and industrialization through the ideals of socialism with Chinese characteristics. Russia, although they may not be aligned to the ideals of social reconstruction, which is informed by Marxism, poses a political threat to the hegemony of the West, and that is why NATO has collaborated itself to undermine its security and criticize its authority. Authority is not the real concern of capitalism. The concern of capitalism is authority that is not held and controlled by capitalists themselves. We must appreciate this to avoid falling into the trap of listening to dishonest critics. The EFF is criticized as an authoritarian even though we hold our democratic elections from national, provincial, regional, and branch level. Yet our counterparts who are funded by the establishment, such as Democratic Alliance, Action SA, and other parties, are never presented as authoritarians, even though in many instances they never hold elections. If anything, all this organization, Action SA in particular, appoints leaders and does not subject its own organization to democratic processes, yet they are not called authoritarian. This shows you that the problem is not authority, but whether capitalists control and inform that authority or not. The EFF for a decade avoided our authority being determined from outside of the founding principles, which makes us a people's movement. As a result, we have become the primary enemy of capital. We, comrades, must therefore never fear any critique that seeks to paint us badly, because we run our organization with authority, and we must know that our authority is that of the working class and is not influenced by capitalism. Therefore, fighters, because of our independence, we must expect an aggressive onslaught from captains of the industry and their puppets in the media, especially since we are celebrating a decade of existence. There will be an attempt to paint our achievements of the past few years as non-existent. as nothing but disruptive and dangerous because the agenda is to undermine that which capital does not control. Our duty is to expose this to our people and be consistent with the message that the EFF remain the only incorruptible and uncaptured organization that will deliver socialism in our lifetime. Commissars and fighters, the EFF has been vindicated on numerous occasions regarding the political, social, and economic destruction of Africans and African identity without violently subjecting of the African, the colonial system in itself ceased to exist. Our people being denied education is violence. Our people living in shacks is violence. Our people working in the mines yet earning little money while enriching the global capitalist is violence. The erasure of our history is violence. The fact that labor, such as domestic work, garden work, and security service are jobs reserved for Africans in service of white people is violence. The fact that a white child's first encounter with an African is that an African is a servant is violence. The entire existence of African is an image through the eyes of the colonizer, and to radically change and imagine ourselves through our own eyes and tradition will be a violent process. The two zones of reality Fanon speaks of, where the town of the European is filled with tarred roads, lights, as opposed to the land of the native, which is filled with poverty and a lack of space as people live on top of one another, perfectly describes the violent situation in South Africa, which must be changed. These are the realities we must be able to explain to our people. We must be able to show them how abnormal their situation is, so that the prospects of violence does not offend them. Our people must never be offended by violence, because we must show them that their very existence is violent. Commissars and fighters, through all of this, we must equally consider the external challenges that result in the collapse of the revolutionary project for African independence. These external challenges are posed by neo-colonial imperialism. Many liberal thinkers like to credit the failure and the collapse of African states to the leadership style of African leaders and blame socialist and anti-imperialist policies. Imperialists and their so-called governance experts blame the failure of African economies on the resistance of independent states to the anarchy of the markets, constantly calling for increased role of the markets and privatization as a solution to economic problems. By the anarchy of the market, we mean that the capitalist class and its proponents in various spheres of society want democratically elected states to allow policy direction and economies to be run and dictated by invisible hand known as the independent markets. This independent market downgrades and rates economies and assess whether a nation is investor-free based on what is regarded as correct political, social, and economic policy. The anarchy of the markets refers to allowing the private sector to self-regulate while equally regulating the society that cost of goods and services, no matter how essential they may be, and without consideration of the basic needs of the people. It results in the manipulation of prices and collusion by private sector to maximize profit, regardless of the impact this may have on ordinary people. It is a breeding ground for corruption. Resistance to this capitalist, disorganized and undemocratic madness through decisive state intervention and planned economy is termed a form of dictatorship. The resistance to the markets and capitalist-based system that pretend to be ideologically neutral is one of the many reasons African states are said to fail. All these reasons for the failure of socialist or African state is promoted by imperialist nation in order to avoid being located as the problem confronting Africa and the third world. It is done to mask the efforts of imperialism to instill hegemony of capitalism policy and its assumption that only legitimate form of authority is that which the West has developed while presenting authority itself as a problem when it is not Western orientation. As Marxists, you must appreciate that our problems are because of global capitalism and its advanced manifestation, which is known as imperialism. But first we must know what is Marx and what is authority, and why global capitalism mobilizes itself against alternative ways of organizing the economy.